whenever I do a topic, like tonight's going to be faith, I always get very excited and think, now this is really an important topic, but I realize I do this every time. But honestly, faith really, really is an important topic. And it's a difficult one because often when people hear the word faith, they think faith is for people who need a crutch, or they think stupid people believe. And there have been great people like Durkheim, who was a Jew and he was a sociologist. You know, his famous quote was, "It's the opiate of the masses." And there's this idea of this mass of idiots who just believe. And the truth is actually very different, that if you actually know the rabbis and our sages, they were anything but idiots. They were all actually geniuses and extremely clever, not only in Torah, but actually in the sciences and lots of different things. So it's a misnomer that stupid people need faith. So I'm going to go through some of the aspects of faith tonight, and hopefully when you learn these things, it will help you to develop your own faith. Now, it's a fundamental thing in Judaism that we have faith. There are things called the 13 principles of faith, and the Rambam actually says that it's essential for every Jew to believe in the 13 principles of faith. Now, if you hear the wording of the 13 principles, it goes, "I believe with perfect faith." So that's really interesting. I believe. How do you believe with perfect faith? So Rabbi Tauber, he talks about how the 13 principles are necessary for one's survival. And what I'm going to be talking to you in the beginning is actually what he talks about. So he says, in the world, if you want to understand, let's say, a table, you need your senses to do so. You look at the table, you might knock on it and hear the table. If it's a beautiful wood, you might smell the table. You use all your senses, you touch it to feel what is this table. And if you were blind, God forbid, you wouldn't really know what a table is. You would know a lot about it. You could feel it and hold it and see how heavy it was. And people could explain it to you, but you'd always be missing some dimension. And if suddenly you were able to see, it would be a whole different thing. You would realize, wow, now I know what a table is. So we have our 5 senses: seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, touching. We also have a 6th sense. People talk about the 6th sense. Some people call it ESP. And again, a lot of people, deride it. But from a Jewish point of view, Rabbi Tauber says it does exist. And he says that we've all had at least one experience of it. We don't all think we're psychic. Some people do more than others. But he says all of us in our lifetime have had a moment when we've had a spiritual 6th sense about something. Now, it doesn't always have to be for good. So you have someone like Uri Geller, who, if any of you remember him, he used to bend spoons. And in fact, I remember at one point he was doing it over the radio. He'd have a radio show and he could bend spoons in people's houses. Don't know how that worked. That is a kind of a psychic ability. Did he use it for the good? I don't think so. He certainly wasn't using it to uplift the world. It was more of a magic trick that he was actually using. But we all have a 6th sense. So what is our 7th sense? We have a 7th sense that is bigger than all of the others. And the 7th sense is emunah, faith. That sense is how we need to see the world. So just like the chair, if we were blind, or the table, we wouldn't see exactly what it is. When you don't use your 7th sense to understand the world, you will never really get a full understanding of the world. It's like a blind person with a table. We need that 7th sense in order to really experience the world. But the 7th sense is related to Shabbat. It's related to the day that we actually switch off. We switch off all our power, if you like. We don't switch lights on and off, but we link with a higher power. We realize that we don't run the world. Hashem runs the world. We let go of the world on the 7th day. And we actually are more in touch with the truth. Now, to have proper emunah, it needs to be connected to truth, and that truth has got to be absolute truth. Now, the Torah is absolute truth. Science is not absolute truth, and we're going to come back to this quite a lot, but the Torah is absolute truth. And it's a hard thing to really internalize this, but the Torah existed before the world. We often get excited. I know when I was at uni, like, oh, I was learning something scientific and go, oh, the Torah also says that. But it's actually the wrong way around. It should be, oh, science is finally tapping into the truth. It's not, oh, isn't that a coincidence? Everything is based in the Torah. The Torah was an architect's plan that God created the world. So one of the easy way to explain it, although it's not easy at all, and I'm making something very simple, is that people think that God was clever and there's such a thing as parents, and so he made the fifth commandment, honor your mother and father. No, 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 it's not like that at all. The Torah had that commandment, and therefore God created parents so that commandment could be fulfilled. It's the other way around. God looked into the Torah and created the world. The Torah is absolute truth. And if the Torah says it's true, it's true. And if the Torah says it isn't true, it isn't true. Now, this is something that's very hard to grasp, and one has to be very humble. One has to know that we don't have all the answers. The beginning of Emunah is humility and modesty. If you think you have all the answers, you can never really have faith because you think you can understand. We cannot understand God and the way he created the world. Just like a child of 3 cannot understand why they should not put their finger in a socket that's electric or put their hand in a toaster. We have a bit more of a sophisticated idea, and we can say to our child, if you put your hand in, you're going to get electrocuted. We have a little bit of an understanding of electricity, but try and tell that to a 3-year-old. They don't get it. Now, so to speak, although the gap is much, much bigger, we don't understand what Hashem knows. And when we think we do, that is a mistake. So the first beginning is we need to have humility to understand that the Torah tells us how to relate to the world. Now, what happens is that everybody has different levels of believing. And I'm going to go through a few, and it'll be interesting for you to see where you fit. And again, I always say, don't feel bad. This is not about making anybody feel bad. We're all on different levels. As long as you're growing, that's really all that matters in life, honestly. So Rabbi Tauber, he has 3 levels. He says the first level is related to the word Elohim. And he says this is the basic of all monotheism. People who believe, yes, there's a creator. He created the world. And then he put it on automatic pilot and he's gone. So there are people like that. They don't believe the world just started randomly, but they don't really believe that God is intimately involved in our lives. The next level, he says, is on the level of Shaddai, and that he talks about we believe in God and that he's not that involved, but every now and then he can drop in. Every now and then he can pop in and do a little miracle or show us that he's there. And many people are on that level. We don't think that God's so involved, and then every now and then we see something and we go, oh yes, maybe God remembered me, or maybe he was there. The third level that Rabbi Tauber talks about is related to the word Havaya, God's highest level. And that level, he says, is when you understand this idea that God recreates the world every moment. He's intimately involved in our lives every single moment. So the idea is that when God said, let there be light in the beginning, the world was created with 10 utterances. He didn't say it once. He literally keeps saying, let there be light, let there be light, let there be light. And if he stopped for 1 minute, poof, the world would disappear. So these are difficult ideas to understand, and they're deep mystical ideas. But on a practical level, the way I understand it, and what you have all heard me talk about over and over, is how God is intimately in our lives, that he orchestrates our lives, that he makes sure we're in the right place at the right time, that he can put certain ideas in our heads where we just feel like I need to go and do that, where we can feel the divine providence, that you actually look at your life and go, how did I land up here? Like you can sometimes feel that you're on this wave and every decision you made landed you in this position, but on some level you know it wasn't you. So the more you can be aware of divine providence and Hashem is in your life, that, according to Rabbi Tauber, is a high level. He talks about as well, and I'll just read it to you. The first, he goes through the 13 principles. We're only going to touch on the first one because I want to talk about the wording. So the first principle of faith says, I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is the creator and driving force of all his creatures. He alone made, makes and will make all happenings. So in this expression, made, makes, and will make, is the idea that God is continually involved in our lives. We're not an automatic pilot. And also, it's very essential, the word creator, that we use the word creator, because it's a big part of being humble, that we understand that we are a creation and we only exist because God created us in the way that he wanted to. Now, we're going to come back to faith, but I want to just go one more step and then I'll come back to it. So I'm going a little bit backwards and forwards and I'll tie it all up. The second thing he says, so how do you believe with perfect faith? And this is where Judaism is totally unique. We can have perfect faith because of the way our religion came into being. And it's very significant because today was actually Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And in a few days' time, on Friday, Thursday night and Friday is first day Shavuot. And Shavuot is the holiday where we celebrate the giving of the Torah. And it's not that we're celebrating a historical event. We need to know that the Torah is being given again. Everything comes down again in a spiral, a higher level every single year. So we are going to receive the Torah literally, spiritually, again on Friday morning. So what happened was that when Hashem took us out of Egypt, it was a public thing. It wasn't one man's experience of religion. It was a public thing that God went in, he upturned nature, he revealed himself in huge ways, and then he took the Jews out of a place that was said that they would never be able to leave, because Paro was the superpower of the world. They had all the latest armaments and technology to stop you, so to speak. What they had was a lot of sorcery. They say there were dogs at the borders that would stop you. All kinds of things. It was totally miraculous that these slaves, after 270 years, could come out in the way that they did. It was a public display. Similarly, besides the Red Sea, when the Red Sea split, everybody's water in the world split. So if you were drinking a glass of water, your water split. So although they didn't have the internet and CNN in those days, everybody knew what happened because the whole world experienced it. And when it came to receiving the Torah at Har Sinai, everybody heard it. Every single Jew heard God speak. And in fact, they say the whole world heard God speak. So the first two commandments were given. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Everybody heard it. But it was such a spiritual experience that everybody's souls left them. They, so to speak, died. Then he gave the second one, you shall have no other gods before me. Their souls went, and the Jews said, no, we can't bear, this is too spiritual. And so thereafter, Moshe spoke on behalf of God. But the first two commandments, every Jew, and in fact, every person in the world, heard it. There's no disputing that it happened. And that is why the two greatest religions, it's funny, I was trying to look if there's anything about Asian religions, but definitely Christianity and Islam, they don't deny Judaism. They just think they're an upgrade. They use a lot of things. They don't deny what happened. They don't say the 10 Commandments weren't given or the Torah wasn't given. It's just that they changed the facts a little bit differently. But no one denies it because it was a worldwide phenomenon. And it wasn't just watching CNN. Everybody experienced it in their bodies. Everybody knew it was happening. It was an incredibly mystical experience. So can you imagine, every Jew agreed that it happened. And then it's been passed down. So I was told by my parents, they were told by their parents, and so on, all the way up. And Rabbi Tauber talks about this. He's actually a Holocaust survivor, but he talks about eyewitness testimony. And he gives a case, I'm sorry, I didn't keep it with me, but he gives a case of a number of years ago where somebody was a Holocaust denier. And they said, but look, there's the Auschwitz is there. And he said, well, it's just a museum that was built. And whatever anybody bought, the deniers had a reason to explain it away. And then they brought in eyewitness testimonies. And I think this was in the 1980s. And there was still a lot of Holocaust survivors alive. So you can imagine there were quite a few, maybe 100 or more, that came in, and every one of them gave eyewitness testimony that bore each other out. And the judge took the eyewitness testimony, because we know that eyewitness testimony, I was there, is a huge thing. Now we have however many millions of Jews. I know there were 600,000 souls, but there were more Jews, a few million Jews. Everybody agreed that it happened. And for Jews to all agree, you know the joke in Israel, how many opinions there are. Everybody agrees. No one denies that. Then, if you read the Torah, we've got names and places. People are named. We know who was there. Doesn't say what they were wearing, but we know who was there, who they were married to, who their children were. We know a little bit about some of their love life. We know what went on. We even know who the Egyptians were, and a lot of the non-Jews were around that time. Everything is there. It's listed. And there are rabbis who can trace their family all the way back to the Torah. They have kept their lineage all the way down. It's not a mystery. It's not like, I think it happened. We know who was there, what they were doing, and exactly what went on. So this is incredible that we have factual evidence that it happened. And I certainly trust my parents, and they trusted their parents because they were there. Just like children of Holocaust survivors know their parents have told them the truth, and so on. So we have unbelievable proof that the Torah was given in the way that it was given. And we also know that there have been archaeological findings, and all these things can be found that have borne out a lot of the things, most of them that were told at that time. So the question is that we all knew it and we all had it, and then what happens to our faith along the way? The way we believe, I believe with perfect faith, is we believe based on knowledge. We don't believe on a thumbsuck. We don't believe because someone gets on the internet and says, I've discovered this, and they've got no science and no proof, and they just believe something. So many people in our world believe scams and rubbish. Now with the COVID, I've heard there's all these cures that are in the net, and people just believe them. That's not believing with perfect faith. That's just being scammed. We can believe with perfect faith because we have 1 million eyewitness accounts that has been tracked all the way down now into it's happened. So I'll give you an analogy. Again, all these analogies, when we say lahavdil, they're not as great as in reality in the spiritual world, but they help us to understand. So I have a doctor that I trust. If you have a doctor that you trust, I have to be honest, I've never really looked at her degrees. So there already, I walked into her office, it says doctor, I trusted her. Thinking about it now, I should have looked into her degrees, I should have looked at the universities. Really, why am I trusting her? How do I know she had the best training? There are a few doctors that aren't real doctors, maybe. So, but on trust, it says doctor, I went to see her. I happen to like a lot of what she's done. And so therefore, I trust her opinion, and I trust her diagnoses, and I trust her treatment. So when she says to me, I'm making this up, but if she were to say to me, Renee, I'm going to give you a script for this, and I say why, and she says, look, it's a bit technical and chemical, just trust me, I will trust her on belief of our past history, on knowledge, because I know she's good, and because I believe she has my best interest at heart. Even though I can't even read her script, I don't know what she's giving me. If she says that's what's good for me, I will trust her. Now, if you think about it, we trust. And that is why, as I say, when people say, oh, believers, they're just the masses, they're idiots. We live in a world of trust. We trust experts. We trust scientists. When I walk into a building, it's an architectural feat. I often look at these high buildings. If the builder tells me it's a secure builder, I trust him. I want to move into a new house. I get a building report. He says it's solid. I trust him. Again, I don't check out his credentials. I don't know anything about building. I don't know if the foundation's solid. He knows. I trust him. So when people say, why do you believe? Well, we all believe all the time, all kinds of things. And so how much more so we should believe something that is a heritage, gold, diamonds, and silver that our great-grandfathers have passed down to us. We need to believe that it is true, and everything the Torah says is true. And once you do that, then your filter or your seventh sense informs everything. And for the first time, you can start seeing the world for what it is, because when we don't do that, we are limited in how we see the world. And I hope that all of you, even from my shiurim, and I know there are lots of shiurim, have really used the time, which I'm going to go into in a lot of depth, to see what's going on in the world in a different way. And how lucky are we that we can see the whole pandemic through the lens of Emunah, rather than being caught up in not seeing it in a proper way, in the fears and the misapprehensions and all the things that people have who don't have faith. Now, it also says, the Tanya says, it's a natural thing for us to have faith, and we are believers, children of believers. It's not difficult. Don't go away thinking, well, I'm not like that. Everybody has that capacity. It's inside of us. We just have to develop that sense. We have to know it's there, and we need to start working on it to develop it. Now, I'm going to talk about what Rabbi Tat says. He has a whole beautiful idea of looking again at how we can look at faith and understand how we should see the world. Now, in his book, World Mask, he talks a lot about how nature is a mask. And again, if you believe that nature is something that's self-sufficient and exists, it's a denial of God. And he says he talks about 4 different levels. And he says the first level is when somebody believes that, so the word nature is teva, and it comes from the word drown. If you do not make it a practice to see beyond the mask, you get drowned in the material. You will lose sight of the spiritual. It's something we actively have to do. So what happens is that there's one level where people believe that there's God. He developed nature, and now nature continues on its own. Similar to the first level we spoke about before, the Elokim, which is the same gematria as nature. God created the world, now nature just gets on with it. Very nice. And again, some people believe God can pop in every now and then if we need him. The second level he talks about is a level where people believe that God created nature, but that nature is a tool. So God fulfills a lot of what he needs to fulfill through the tool of nature. And Rabbi Tat says that's a deficiency. If you need a tool, it means that you're deficient in some way. So if you think about it, I was listening to this thing about how women can't open jam jars. And we've got one thing now that you put on, and you need a tool because otherwise I can't open the jam jar. So if you can do it yourself, you don't need the jam jar. So Rabbi Tat has a different one. He says, when you need to wash your back in the bath, you have a sponge at the end of a stick. You don't use it in your front because you don't need it. The same thing, Hashem doesn't need a tool. If you believe that, you're implying that there's a deficiency. Now, the third level is the level of Rabbi Hanina ben Doza that I spoke about in the first shiur, where you can see completely beyond nature. The story was with him, just to remind you, is they didn't have oil to light candles, and he said to his daughter, God who makes oil burn can make vinegar burn. And she lit vinegar and it burnt. On his level, he's not the only one. There were people who it wasn't that they actually made miracles. They actually just understood that to God it made no difference. That there's nature and God are all the same thing. God can make anything burn if he chooses to. So that's a very high level, and it's a belief that we can see beyond nature, and really God is operating all the time. They say that the Alter Rebbe of Liadi, he said when he was really old and he was dying, he told people, I never really saw the beam of my house. I saw the words that formed the beam, that God uses to create the beam. He never saw it as a physical object. He could see beyond what it was actually made of. There's also a story told of Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. They say that he never closed his eyes even when he was praying without a siddur. And he would sometimes look, it would seem that he was looking out of a window, and somebody asked him, Reb Levi, how do you daven like that? He said, I don't see the marketplace. I don't see people. I just see godliness. So there were people on that level that They don't see the beam, or they don't see the people. They are seeing the spiritual behind. The nature is no longer a mask, and then Hashem doesn't need to have a mask. Just like if you bump a friend who's wearing a mask, the minute you know who they are, they take off the mask. There's no need for the mask. The game's over. But he says an interesting thing, there's a fourth level. And this fourth level is for people, tzaddikim, and there are very few of them on this level, where the fact that there's nature actually pains them. So listen to this, it's a very deep idea. In order for God, who's infinite, to create a finite world, in order for God to create nature, he's had to contract himself and contract himself and contract himself. There's such a big gap between infinite and finite. And he's had to really contract himself and hide himself. And in fact, that's one of the miracles, that God has been able to hide himself in the physical. But these tzaddikim feel pain that Hashem has done that. Because to them, what a pity that Hashem has had to contract himself in this way. Now, what this means is that for people on their level, there's no difference between a miracle and something natural. For most of us, there is a difference. Most of us, we feel our life is going on, and then suddenly we think something miraculous is happening, and then we feel it. But a lot of the time, we're just sort of going along in our everyday lives. For these tzaddikim, for them, the level of the miraculous is more normal, this fourth level I spoke about, and seeing nature is actually more difficult for them. Now, miracles are a way that Hashem reveals himself to us. And what I'm going to tell you in a few minutes is we live in a world where we have very few miracles. But on the whole, miracles were always a way that God revealed himself. And depending on the different levels of each of the tzaddikim, they would experience it. So I want to read you something because I think it explains it beautifully. And it's how there are different levels, as I was saying, different levels of spirituality, and we're all on different levels. But something about how even great kings who are so tuned into Hashem related differently. And the reason I'm going into this into a little bit of detail is because what these four kings are going to illustrate is, if we believe nature is just Hashem, why do we need to do natural things? Why do we need to earn a living? Why do we need to go to doctors? Why don't we just, and why didn't they? Because the truth is, even the highest tzaddikim did something natural. So he says, for example, Noah, when Hashem told him to build the ark, did the ark really naturally fit in all the animals? No, but he had to build something physical, and then the miracle could occur. When he told Moshe to go and look at the whole of Israel, he didn't just say, look, he said, climb up the mountain, which was like and then you will see. There was no real need for it, but it was Moshe doing something physical. When Yaakov went to sleep and he wanted to protect himself, he put a few rocks around his head. Didn't really protect him, but it did. But he had to do that physical. And so on. There are lots of different stories where the tzaddikim always did something physical before the miracle was manifest. So this is a very deep idea of, even though there is physical, there is something so spiritual. We're not meant to not be physical. We're not meant to strive to the point where we just say, I'm not going to earn a living, I'm not going to cook, it's all just going to happen. There is a story about that, though, if we talk about that, and that is Reb Zusha. And Reb Zusha had enormous faith, and he would sit and learn till about 4 o'clock every day. And then at about 4 o'clock, he would look at the sky and he'd say, Hashem, I'm hungry. And then the shamus would bring him a meal. And this went on for years. And one day the shamus started thinking, you know what? I don't get enough appreciation. He says, Hashem, I'm hungry, and I bring in the food. It's not Hashem. I'm not going to bring him food tomorrow. Now, what happened was that Reb Zusha used to get up at about 3 in the morning and walk on a dirty little road track to get to the river in time to go into the mikveh. And there happened to be a rich man that was coming to Reb Zusha for a brocha. And he happened to be traveling through the night. And at 3 in the morning, as he was trying to get to Anipoli, he sees this, what looked like a beggar, and he sort of pushed Reb Zusha off the line, and Reb Zusha fell in a puddle. He didn't know it was Reb Zusha. And then he went on to this inn. In the morning, he says to the innkeeper, you know, I'd like to go and speak to Reb Zusha and ask him for, you know, for a brocha. And he said, well, you know, you were coming at last. Did you not bump him on the road? Because he's the only guy that would be out at about 3 a.m. So the rich man went, oh my goodness, maybe it was probably was Reb Zusha that I pushed into the puddle. How am I going to make amends? So the innkeeper said, well, the other thing he does regularly is every day at 4 o'clock, he says, Hashem, I'm hungry. Why don't we prepare him a beautiful meal? And then at 4 o'clock, when he says it, you'll go in with the meal. Well, of course, it's clear what happened. The shamus is now waiting to prove to Zusha that it's not really Hashem that's giving him food. Meantime, the rich man arrives with this beautiful banquet, and at 4 o'clock, Reb Zusha innocently says, Hashem, I'm hungry. The rich man comes rushing in and gives him the best meal he's had in a long time. So Hashem will still, he had faith it would come to him one way or another, and it does, but he still had to say, Hashem, I'm hungry. We still have to do something physical. So I want to go through a midrash. There are 4 different kings, and you'll see how each of them related to Hashem. So the first one we want to talk about is King David. King David said, I shall pursue my enemies and overtake them, and I shall not return until I have destroyed them. States the midrash, Hashem said, I shall do it, and that's what happened. David pursued the enemy and destroyed them with divine assistance. Then there was a king Asa who said, I do not have the power to destroy them, but I shall pursue them, and you, Hashem, shall do it. And Hashem said, I shall do it. So Asa pursued the enemy, and Hashem destroyed them. Then King Yehoshaphat said, I do not have the power to destroy or even to pursue. Rather, I shall sing in prayer and praise, and you shall do it. And Hashem answered, I shall do it. So Yehoshaphat sang, and the enemy was defeated without any military action on his part. And then there was King Chizkiyahu, who said, I do not have the power to destroy or to pursue or to sing. Rather, I shall sleep upon my bed, and you shall do it. And Hashem answered, I shall do it. So Reb Chizkiyahu slept. There was a miraculous defeat of an enemy during the night. There was like 100,000 soldiers. Now, you would think that Chizkiyahu is on this amazing level. He did nothing. He said, I totally trust Hashem, went to sleep, and in the morning there were 100,000 dead soldiers outside. Whereas King David was involved in battle. But this is what's really deep about the Jewish way. The Jewish way is that we need to do the physical, and that is why Mashiach did not come from Chizkiyahu and is going to come from King David. Because the ultimate purpose of human existence is to yield the ego in the service of Hashem. So even while David HaMelech was planning the war and fighting the war and destroying, he had no ego. He knew it was only happening because of Hashem. This is a very difficult thing to do. You're fighting a war, you're winning, and you go, it only happened because of Hashem. That is what Hashem wants for us. He wants us to show that we do have no independent existence. So that's really, really incredible, because one of the ways that it works is like a piano. On a piano, there are keys. When you play the keys don't actually make music. There's strings behind that actually make the music. You play the keys and the strings make the music. And the strings are normally hidden. The same thing, we do the physical, whether it's climbing the mountain like Moshe or fighting like, and spiritually things happen. So we need to do physical things in order to do it. I said earlier, however, we live in a generation, Rabbi Tat says, where there are no miracles. We don't see miracles like in those days. Chizkiyahu, it happened for him, and it has happened for people that they don't do things, but it works out for them. That's not what we should be striving for with faith. Faith is something different. Faith is being in this world, being partners with Hashem, doing whatever we need to do, but have no ego and know everything's up to Hashem. So what happens if we don't have miracles? If we don't have a miracle to show us that nature is just nature and it's part of Hashem, but we've got to see beyond. Rabbi Tat says the reason we don't have miracles is because what would our generation do with it? We would find a reason for it. We would get scientists to look at how we can prove that there was nothing spiritual. And this is what we say, that before Mashiach comes, and we are in the footsteps of Mashiach, the world is going to be very, very dark. And it's going to be so dark that people will not see anything. We will not, and the Rebbe says all we have to do is open our eyes. But when we're in the darkness, even if a miracle were in front of us, Rabbi Tat says we will go, not such a miracle. You know what? There's artificial intelligence and maybe this happened, and we'll always explain it away. And it would be catastrophic for us, he says, to actually have miracles. So what has Hashem done to help us? What Hashem has done, and where we can see Hashem, is in cause and effect. We are in a generation where we believe in cause and effect. And a simple one is we believe that if we work hard at our jobs, we will make a lot of money and be successful. And then Rabbi Tat says Hashem breaks the cause and effect. Hashem shows us that you can work as hard as you like, but it's not necessarily going to be a success. That is how we get to see beyond nature. So when I was reading this chapter, it's not a new book, I thought how appropriate it is now with what we're going through. I've said this many times, but for me, I'm still amazed. Where Hashem has broken cause and effect. So you can have Qantas, or you can have, I see other businesses are closing, that everybody thought would always be fine. What could ever go wrong? It's got a brilliant CEO. World travel is fantastic. People want to travel. We think we're in a natural thing, and then Hashem says something no one dreamed of, a pandemic, and suddenly some of the biggest businesses in the world are crippled. And also some of the simplest businesses are suddenly booming. Fascinating how things have completely changed. And we have to use this time to realize there isn't really cause and effect. For a lot of the time there is, because we do have, Hashem has put a natural rhythm, but our job is to see beyond that. And to know that when failure comes along, Hashem is giving us a gift to know it's not really up to us. We have to get rid of our ego. Know when we're successful, it's to Hashem, thanks to Hashem. And when we failed, it's thanks to Hashem. Because all of that is not up to us. Cause and effect is not the way that we think it is. And I'm sure that if you think very carefully, a lot of people, I'm thinking of people I know who've got investment properties, and suddenly their life is upside down. And people who had regular jobs, they would joke about being a packer at Coles, suddenly they're the ones that had a regular income during this. It's really interesting. How we used to think, we cannot go back to that. We have to use this as a way of breaking the mask and understanding that there really isn't a cause and effect. And that we need to see beyond. And when we use the sense of emunah, and we understand it's based on truth, we have a way of seeing the world that is going to help us on every level. It is going to help us be happier, be more fulfilled and calmer, and see a purpose in everything. Because life is not easy. I'm not saying that people who are going through this, it's easy, but they're opportunities for us to grow. So what happens, Rabbi Tat says, when someone still refuses, and this is very, very important, there are those people that no matter what you tell them, they will be adamant it's cause and effect. You want to work hard, you lay so many bricks, that's how much you're going to make. And nothing can interfere with it. So what does Hashem do? He can't do anything with them, but Hashem says, okay, mida keneged mida, I will reflect you. You want to believe in cause and effect? I will operate in your life on a level of cause and effect. I will not swoop down in a miracle. I will not do anything miraculous to happen. Whatever will happen will be cause and effect. Now Hashem doesn't do it as a punishment. It's a natural consequence of how we behave. Hashem reflects it. But there's a deep purpose for these people. And the purpose is they're there to test us. Because we have free choice at every moment. Do we want to see God in the picture? Or do we want to believe it's just nature, it's cause and effect, it would have happened anyway? If we do, there are enough people who Hashem is not doing anything magical with, that we can say, you see that guy over there? He's worked hard and he's made money. And you see that person over there? They didn't study that hard and they didn't do so well. So you can see it's obvious, it's cause and effect. And therefore, that makes my free choice harder, because now I see people like that and it tests me. Why wouldn't I believe in cause and effect when there are enough people around me that seem to be following that? So these are very, very deep ideas. You have to really mull over them, because we need to know who we're looking at. But as I keep saying, this is an incredible opportunity to realize it's not so easy to have cause and effect. So I want to share with you something that I heard today. And for me, this is where Imuna, or seeing it through the filter, is just a whole different way of looking at it. So this morning I was watching Insiders. I always watch it as a current affair program. Well, not always, but I like to watch it. And they were talking about this major bungle that our treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, has made. And of course, by virtue of him, then it means it's also the Prime Minister. And the opposite party, the Labour, going in and saying, this is going to be the worst thing on Josh Frydenberg's CV. And, you know, Penny Wong is saying Josh Frydenberg will have to have the courage to come to the Senate and take responsibility. And they're all going over. So what was the bungle? Is the government estimated, I think it was 32 billion. Forgive me if I got the numbers right, but it doesn't really matter. 32 billion will need to be spent on the JobKeeper package. And actually only 16 billion is going to be spent. There's a 16 billion mistake, but in the positive. The government doesn't have to borrow that money, which I thought was great. I thought, well, isn't that good? And I'm not saying what they should do with it is a different story, but why isn't that a good thing? But because he made a mistake. You see, if you don't believe that Hashem is running the world, he's got to answer for it. And no one's actually saying, wow, isn't that incredible? And as one of the journalists said, well, this means that there were 3 million workers that were able to get through this time without needing to get into JobKeeper. Now, besides the fact of saying he's a human being, and I'm not excusing him and I don't know all the back things, but it's a way, I'm trying to talk about the way we look at things. Human beings make mistakes, but also Hashem can change things. So for example, I often, when I hear about a hurricane is approaching Northern Australia, I often watch it and they say it's a grade 8. And then the next day they say it's downgraded to a 5. And it happens more often than not. Because human beings are predicting, but Hashem then decides how it's going to be. Just because the charts predict it's going to be that, we never know until it actually happens what Hashem is going to do. And these figures that Josh Frydenberg and his group did were based on projections. So they were talking about, yes, who did it? They got their projections wrong, their numbers were wrong, but they're just projections. They're not, nothing's in concrete. They sat down, they said, we think this is how many people will die in the pandemic. We think this is what we're going to need. We think this is how we're going to help people. They were all assumptions. They weren't reality. And then it didn't turn out that way and in a positive way. So when you don't believe in Hashem, you can focus on the fact it was a mistake, or you can focus on the fact, which I prefer, to go, wow, isn't it good that those predictions didn't come about, that it has not been as bad as they thought it would be. And thank God the government was prepared. I'm very happy they were prepared, and I'm very glad they put the money aside if they needed it. But why? I don't get why it's such a thing about the mistake, because we are not God and we don't control the outcome. And they did all the right things. And if they made a mistake, they made a mistake. These things happen. And it's just how you want to say all this aggravation and all the criticism. And I just go, why? Why are you putting yourself through all this aggravation? Why can't we just say, okay, it was a mistake, human beings, we predicted, predictions don't always work, just like the weather isn't always right. Let's move on, let's fix them, let's see what we have to fix. But it's something about feeling we're in control. It's something about believing that artificial intelligence can play with the numbers and you can actually do this planning and this mapping and work out, but we actually can't. And this is where we have to get rid of our egos and know that it's not always going to be the way that we think it's going to be. And this is where Emunah comes in. Faith that Hashem is running the show, that we are his creation, that he is organizing our lives every minute, and that it's going to work out in a way that it's meant to work out. That doesn't always mean it's going to work out how we want it to, and it doesn't, unfortunately, always mean that it's going to work out in the way we would like it to. There is pain and there is suffering, but it's a real faith that we are limited. We can only predict so much, and we can only do so much. There was a famous Jewish sage called the Ibn Ezra, and he could never make a living. And he one day was known to say, you know, if I were to start making burial shrouds, people would stop dying. Because he understood whatever he tried didn't work, but he understood that's what Hashem wanted for him. Did it mean he had to stop trying? No, we still have to do the physical. We still have to play the piano. We have to do what we have to do. But like David HaMelech, it's knowing that every step of the way is really not about us. We're in this constant interaction with God, where we're doing our bit, but we know that it's really up to him. Like health is a good one. We can only do so much. We can eat well, we can exercise, we can do whatever we need to do, but we might get sick. And then you get other people, you know, they do a lot of things wrong. They smoke, they don't exercise, whatever, and they're fine, and they live a very long life. I know statistically, you'll all tell me it's not the majority, but there are those people, and this is all about free choice. Hashem leaves people. We have to, in our lives, look at things in a much, much deeper way. So we are children of believers. It's not difficult to believe. It's about opening our eyes and looking at the world in a different way. And Hashem gives us opportunities. And when we have failure, instead of seeing it as a failure, we need to say, this is a reminder to bring Hashem back into my life. We need to actually know that this isn't all about what I want, or there isn't always cause and effect. And the more you do that, the more you relate to all kinds of different people and to different things in a more positive way, because the whole world has meaning. The whole world is moving towards an end point of Mashiach coming. We need to open our eyes. So I want to tell a story. It's a story I heard from Reb Carlebach. And this story is told that there was this innkeeper, which was a very common thing that Jews did in Russia. And this innkeeper couldn't pay his rent, which was also a very common thing that happened. And one day he was walking, he hadn't paid his rent for a few months, and his poritz, the landlord, saw him and beat him up, beat him to a pulp and left him for dead. He was beside himself, and he crawled back home, bleeding. He got home, he was finished. After a few days, his wife, who was a believer, said to him, you know, I heard that there is a great sage, Reb Elimelech of Lezhensk. I think you should go and see him and ask him what you should do and ask him for a blessing. So if he wasn't of such great faith, he didn't really want to go, but she was a good wife. She nagged him, and eventually he went to listen to his wife. What could he lose? So he was still a little bit injured. He put his shoes over his shoulder because he only had one pair of shoes, and he had to walk. It was a very, very long walk. And he wasn't sure why he was going, but he kept going. And along the way, now before you go and see a tzaddik, you write what's called a kfittel. You write down your request, and him and his wife had worked out what he was going to ask. When he got, at one point, there was 3 other famous rabbonim there. The one I remember was the Seer of Lublin, but there was also the Ropshkita and somebody else. Anyway, the Seer of Lublin said, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to Reb Elimelech because this is what happened. So he said, please, can I look at your kfittel? So the Seer looked at the kfittel, and he said, oi, Moshe, this isn't good. If I were you, I'd go home and I would hide. Don't come out because you're going to be killed. It's not good. Anyway, to Moshe's credit, he said, listen, my wife said I must go to Reb Elimelech. I'm not listening to you. And he continued walking and eventually got to Reb Elimelech. And Reb Elimelech looked at the kfittel, and he had the ability to know that the Chozeh had looked at it, psychic powers, he could see. And he said, I see the Seer of Lublin told you to hide. He said, yes. He said, no, I'm telling you what to do, don't hide. when the Poritz comes to your house next time, you tell him that you're not even going to talk to him until he renews your lease and gives you 10,000 rubles to start your business again. And there was a huge sum of money at that time. So now Moshe thought the guy was really mad. He thought was really upset with his wife, and he put his shoes over his shoulder and he trekked home. Well, what had happened in the meantime was the Poritz gets home and his wife says, you know, have you seen Moshe anywhere? Now, you know, they say every anti-Semite hates all the Jews, but they have one special Jew that they like. You know, it's their Jew, so Moshe was her purchaser. She would take him to the market and he would help her pick out certain things. So the Poritz said, yes, I left him for dead a few days ago. He wasn't paying his rent. I'd had enough of him. She said, are you mad? He's my Moshe. I need him in the marketplace. Now you go and find him and you bring him back to me. He said, but he's dead. She said, I'm not interested. You go and find Moshe. So the Poritz goes and he sees there's a bit of blood outside the house and he knocks on the door and he says, Moshe, Moshe, are you in there? And now Moshe starts to tremble. And he thinks, I should have listened to the seer of Lublin. I should have hidden. This is going to be the end of me. So he was very, very quiet. And he's looking at his wife. And the Poritz bangs again. He says, Moshe, Moshe, let me in. I haven't come to hurt you. I'll need you to come with me to my wife. Moshe suddenly remembers what Rebbe Elimelech said. He says, can I remember what he should do? He says, I'm not talking to you until you promise me to renew my lease and you promise me to give me 10,000 rubles. And the Poritz said, whatever you want, but please, please come and work with my wife in the market again. So this story Shlomo Carlebach tells, he said he heard it from the chief rabbi of Persia in the 1970s. And they were talking about how often stories are told that are beyond, they are historically, prophetic in some way. And he said that this story had been told to him when he was little in the early 1900s. What is the moral of the story and what do they think? He said, this is a story we want to tell people who have gone through the Holocaust. He says, some people only see up to the beating. The seer of Lublin only saw up to the beating, but Elimelech of Rezhensk saw beyond. And after the Holocaust and what's happened to the Jews since then, all the good things that have happened, that's the beyond. So obviously, what is the moshel of this? That sometimes we only see up to the beating and we're afraid of the beating. And I'm not saying it's easy or nice or painless, not at all. But we have to know from a Jewish point of view, with a sense of emunah, we have to see beyond. We have to know that everything we're going through has a purpose and a reason that's mystical. We have to know that we are moving, we are in the footsteps of Mashiach. We are really far down into 6,000 years. So we need to always see beyond. We mustn't limit ourselves like a blind person who can't see a table. We need to see the whole picture. Every individual of us, we're part of a bigger plan. We're part of a whole plan that's moving towards the end of days. And each of us has a particular purpose in that. We mustn't get fixated on the beating. We need to know it's part of a bigger picture. What does that mean for us now? Well, it means that some of us have taken a beating and some of us have gone through very, very difficult times. And I don't think, and I'm not prophesying, but I think it's just the beginning for people who've lost their jobs, for the economy to get going. People are going to struggle for a while. I'm optimistic. We can bounce back in miraculous ways. Things can come together in ways we haven't thought about. I do think we're going to see lots of good things that are going to come out of it. Like the big one that has really come out is how people are talking about climate now. Because people saw, when I say people, a lot of politicians, I've heard them talk about, you know, when there was no smog, the difference, it sort of touched people's souls. Like, actually, what are we doing? So a lot of good is going to come out of it. But emunah means that we don't wait for the proof. We know in our hearts, let's look at the good. Let's see beyond the beating. Let's keep refining our emunah. Let's contemplate God every day and bring him into our lives so that whatever we see, is from a level of faith. Why does Hashem always say, I'm the Lord your God that took you out of the land of Egypt? Why are we meant to say that every day? Because we are a people of redemption. We believe in redemption. It's part of our basic belief. On a personal level and on a race level and on a global level. We are very optimistic. If you think about how Jews have survived and what we've gone through, we are optimistic about the future, even when we're going through hard times. You know, David HaMelech, when he was davening for kingship. He was in terrible times. He was being pursued. He looked high, and we've always looked high, and if you think about how the state of Israel came about long even before the war, there were visionaries who were looking beyond. How do we move out of this? What is the future? Lots of historical stories where people were always looking beyond. And that's what we need to all do, dig deep and look beyond in our personal stories as Jews in whichever country we are, and as a whole to look beyond. This hasn't been an accident. And I hope we're all going to move out of it soon. I'm not saying I hope we go back to what we were. I hope we come out of it realizing that there's no such thing as normal. There's no such thing as natural. There's no such thing as cause and effect. It's a mask that Hashem has put on. And let us all look beyond. Let Hashem take off his mask, because the more you open your eyes, the more you will see Hashem in your life. And the easier it becomes to see it. Don't be one of those people that are locked into cause and effect. There's so much more that you can do. But it all starts with humility. I believe. Don't be ashamed to say I believe. It takes intelligence to believe. Why would anyone want to limit themselves to science? Science is not, it's not the Torah. You know, I once gave a shir about how, since when I studied, I remember when we studied in the 70s, what was in the DSM then and what's in the DSM now. It changes all the time. I'm not saying science is rubbish. I also believe in science, but we have to know, go with a mind that this is what it's saying right now, but it actually isn't Torah. Whereas things in Torah don't actually change. The Torah doesn't change. So I wish everyone a Chag Sameach, a happy Shavuot. Receive the Torah, allow it to permeate you. Take on that extra sense and go out into the world with your eyes open. See beyond, and you will see magical things.